No one knows more about the Minneapolis and St. Louis Railroad than Don Hofsommer. A lifelong fan, Don will cover the railroad from the 1930s to the 1960s, when it was merged into the Chicago and Northwestern.
Great Northern's Cyrus H. Jenks was an excellent, if stern and demanding operating officer who was not without wit. Once, while he was on an inspection trip, he received word that a switch engine at Crookston, Minnesota, had wandered without apparent reason into the turntable pit. What should be done? Asked the local official. Jenks immediately ordered that the other switch engine at that location should use the company's big hook and extract the first locomotive. Later in the day, as his inspection train rolled onward, the telegraph operator at a wayside station hooped up another message. Now, reported the local official at Crookston, the hook was also in the pit. Should another record be summoned from Melrose? Hell no, scribbled Jenks on a company telegraph form. There's no more room in the pit at Crookston.
You're right.
From the Chicago Great Western, I'm sure. A man complained about being cold in the depot and noted no fire in the waiting room stove. This man happened to be the division superintendent. Get out there and build a fire, he shouted at the agent. Can't, said the agent. I'm too busy sending messages. The superintendent wrote out a little message to the agent, told him who he was, and handed him the message which read, fire this agent immediately, and told him to send it at once. Can't send messages, the agent blurted out, too busy building fires. Well, M&StL, Don's railroad, it really should be railway. But of course, I didn't own M&StL. I didn't own stock, had no bonds in the company. But it was, nevertheless, my railroad. I'm sure most of the people in here have a particular railroad that's a favorite. Mine just happened to be the Toot and Louie. I did see steam. I really am old. I did see steam, not much, a little when we lived in Callender, the first 6 years of my life, and later in Fort Dodge, where we were from 1944 to 1948. But steam was kind of a remote thing compared to what Bill Armstrong created and memorialized on his own. Anybody remember Bill Armstrong? One or two, a remarkable man, wonderful man. I don't know the size of his camera, probably a 116 or 122 perhaps. This is a view that he made, Mason City. If you know Mason City today, where M&StL used to be, it certainly doesn't look like this today. Bill was really very, very good about recording movements on M&StL branches, particularly the Story City branch, and a little bit on the Newton branch. And here you have an image that he made near Roland. And we had a discussion earlier about the Y at Story City. And here is an image of that Y, a 200, that's a 460 turning itself there. And notice the caboose, which you can easily guess also served as the movement for means of moving express and I'm sure some LCL. Next. Another view at Roland that Bill Armstrong made, 1941, and look at the business. at Sully on the Newton branch. Beautiful view. And here, back on the Story City line, Bill ultimately went to the CNNW and served in the engineering department in Chicago. My saga began at Callender. To the left of the depot at Callender was the S. Hansen Lumber Yard. My dad managed that. Cliff Ferguson was the agent at M&StL agent at Callender. My dad and Cliff were really good friends. Ferguson went on to be a traveling agent for M&StL at Peoria and retired under CNNW at Flag in 1963 in the sales department. Here we are. I had climbed up on a boxcar, no OSHA around, no government agents. And the dispiriting thing of this view to me is that the only human being on the platform is the mail messenger. My memory is that in the shank of the evening, in the summertime, Dad, Mom, and friends would walk down to the M&StL depot and wait for the 10:30, as it was called. It was the northbound passenger train from Des Moines to Minneapolis, and the lot would be filled with cars and others milling around, waiting the train from the south. It was a routine in small town America at the time. By the time that this view was made in the summer of 1950, passengers were practically extinct on the platform, and people didn't pay attention to the comings and goings of M&StL's passenger train at Callender. And today, if you're in Callender, you'll find that the house track is gone. The elevators, there were 3 elevators at Callender in my growing up years. They're all gone. The bulk plant's gone, and it looks very different. Next. We moved to Fort Dodge in the winter of 1944. Here's a view at the engine facility. You can see the CGW bridge in the background. Alcos, they're waiting to be serviced and go out on runs. Next. The X-1003 was the Russell that was staged in Fort Dodge. Look at how elegant it was maintained. It had heavy duty on those lines out of Fort Dodge. The D-842 and D-742 were routine in the switching jobs at Fort Dodge during these years. And under steam, they would help. They were helpers to Albert Lee and even sometimes up to Terra. Helper engines on M&StL. What a deal. And here we have a scene at the IC depot, which M&StL was a tenant. Next. Here is the up train to Albert Lee, leaving Fort Dodge. Next. We moved to Spencer in 1948. Passenger service had been abbreviated so that train left Fort Dodge about 6:45 in the morning, made an Esterville turn, and back to Fort Dodge. You can probably guess that passengers were scarce. The mail contract had ended after Christmas of 1947. We had gone to Spencer to visit the city in April. That's why I made this view. By the time we moved, that train had been terminated. Here's a man named James Murphy. Jimmy Murphy was an all business engineer, locomotive engineer. I asked him one time, what about steam and what about diesels? And it didn't take long for him to say that he preferred diesels. but nevertheless, he still dressed himself in the uniform of a steam locomotive engineer. And I mentioned this guy in particular because he was a friend to me in all instances. Anytime I showed up on the platform at Spencer, he beckoned me on into the cab of the Alco. You might notice the train order is stuck there to the left of his arm. Jimmy Murphy, a marvelous man and a wonderful locomotive engineer. Charles A. Brown, Charlie Brown. He too noticed me on the platform at Spencer and entered in conversation. And one day he made a terrible mistake. He said, "Why don't you come along with us to Fort Dodge sometime?" It was a dreadful mistake on his part. On his next trip, I gave him some dates that I would be available for such a trip. And sure enough, he made good on that invitation, riding with him to Fort Dodge, walking with him to the IC depot to register in, and then walking with him down to his home and stayed the night with him. And the next morning, after breakfast, on the train at 6:45 and returned to Spencer. The way things were at that time was reflected in Charlie Brown. Incidentally, Charlie Brown never met a beer he didn't like. And after his retirement, the doctor told him, "Charlie, you can only have one beer a day." So Charlie saved up and had 6 on Saturday. A wonderful man, Charlie Brown. Max Siedelmeyer on the left migrated from Germany in 1913 and took up employment as a brakeman for M&StL at Fort Dodge the next year. This was his final trip, seen here at Britt. Max had the most beautiful handwriting I think I've ever seen. He was a consummate pack rat. He would go to every customer on the line and get calendars and pens and pencils and whatever else. And then he shared that with anybody who wanted it. He also knew that I had an interest in M&StL memorabilia of all sorts. And so as depots were closed, he would go in and pick up ticket daters, brass wax seals, lanterns, official guides, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then in my absence, he would call my dad and say to my dad, "Tell Don when he's back in town that he has a shipment in the freight house." The most dramatic instance of that was that he and his brakeman at the time, Al Severson, picked up the depot bench at Curlew when the depot was closed, put it in an empty boxcar, took it to Spencer, put it in the freight house, and then again called my dad and said, "Don has a shipment in the freight house." We still have that depot bench in our property. It's a wonderful holding. Max was a wonderful man. As I said, I was always welcome in the cab of the locomotive at Spencer. On the left, you can see the new steel depot, and in the background, the original depot that was put up in 1899. It was at that stage being torn down. Again, a view from the engineer's seat of the Alco. They were always called Alco. I never heard them ever called RS1s. Well, why would you have 2 cabooses on 56 at Spencer? And the reason was that the winter preceding this view in May was dreadful and so bad between Terrell and Raleigh and Raleigh and Esterville that the Russell plow could not use its wings to widen out the cuts. The result was that the regularly scheduled bay window caboose wouldn't clear, and 1119 was put back in service. So on this particular trip, they brought both the caboose 1119 that they'd use in the wintertime, and the one that they favored, 1140, from Fort Dodge to Esterville and back, so that they could put their gear from one caboose to the other. And on 57, they said, well, you know, we got extra bunks for you. You want to go along? Does a bear like honey? Mm-hmm. And so I made the round trip up to Esterville and back. This is another trip. Here we are leaving Clare in August of 1942. Well, some days are better than others. And here we have a Russell with misfortune north of between Langdon and Terrell. Al Fox was the superintendent, and my dad and I had driven up to make this scene. And Fox said sardonically to my dad, well, was that good enough for you? Here's a pretty unusual event. At least it was for the M&StL in Spencer, Iowa. This was an annual trip that the Des Moines Chamber of Commerce made to various points around the state of Iowa as goodwill tour. In this instance, the train had gone up to Esterville on the Rock Island and was headed back to Des Moines from Esterville through Spencer. And here it made a morning stop at Spencer so that the Spencer Chamber of Commerce and other business people could be entertained. I often wondered what the ride was like coming down from Esterville over some pretty soft track. The car right behind the locomotive, as you might guess, is a heater car, which M&StL had two built out of the World War II Army sleepers. Another unusual movement for Spencer on the M&StL. This is the spray train, and it's not clear to me what the process was. Here you had a spray train, obviously, but the next couple of summers had weed burners, and then they went back to spraying again. Here you can see the train is headed out of Spencer on the Milwaukee IND over to Ruthven, trackage rights from Spencer to Ruthven, 13 miles. The 4-track is the Iowa division from Des Moines through Spencer to Spirit Lake on the Milwaukee Road. Next. Back to spraying. There's a GE-25 taken out of passenger service and reinstituted for service. Boy, can you imagine that the guy's job there, spraying there at Spencer. On to the main line. Here is one of M&StL's FTs resting at Marshalltown. Elegant, and M&StL always kept them in good order and looking fine. Marshalltown. Incidentally, this view was made on the day that Iowa chapter NRHS was founded at the Hotel Tall Corn in Marshalltown. And here you have the time freight in from Minneapolis. They would change locomotives. Here we have 19's Extra coming across the highway bridge just south of Hampton. This is the lone entry of M&StL into this category of locomotives. I was told by Bill Landmester, who was the M&StL master mechanic, that the reason that M&StL had 3 units instead of 4 was that Cedar Lake engine facility could not handle 4 units. I don't know if that's apocryphal or correct, but in any event, they never did have 4 units. Next. And here we have the passenger operation coming into Manly. This is the train up from Albia. It was a heavy mail train, as you might guess, getting mail at Albia from both Wabash and from CB&Q. More mail at Grinnell, as an example. Remember back then when the mail service really was service? Here's the branch out of Belmont. Good business out of the bean crusher at Belmont at that time. The brakeman here probably would be cited for safety violation. The Alcos did not come MU'd, but Cedar Lake got that job done in the, must have been the mid-50s, I would say. They were good luggers. Here you have 56 coming up the grade into Gilmore City. I love those front-mounted bells. They were from M&StL steam locomotives, remounted on the Alcos. Great sound. So did the Alcos. The Des Moines engine facility. This is just before passenger service ended between Minneapolis and Des Moines on the M&StL. You may remember that the Bud coaches, the elegant Bud coaches, were in service for maybe 6 or 7 years and disposed of. And M&StL had a very unfortunate experience with the Bud cars. And so they had to rejigger these old GEs and shoehorn in a few seats at the back. That must have been a dreadful ride. Passenger service actually had ended before this photo was made, and the post office department asked the M&StL to keep the service in line for about 3 more weeks so that as the postal service rejiggered its operation. Here we have number 50 between Badger and Fort Dodge. Crew anxious to get home, as you might guess. Nice train. Here was a really intriguing joint operation that was not much remarked. This was a through train from Minneapolis to Chicago with Illinois Central via Waterloo. In this instance, and usually there was, during the diesel era at least, was one IC locomotive and one M&StL locomotive. That was not always the case, but usually the case. Right behind the second unit is meat from Albert Lee from the Wilson pack that had been pushed over to the M&StL yard in Albert Lee and picked up for delivery by IC into the Chicago Gateway. Here is the reverse operation leading with 2 M&StL locomotives out of Waterloo, AC1. AC1 was the upbound train, AC2 the southbound train. Next. After the Heinemann invasion at M&StL, the operation was changed dramatically, even the paint scheme, as you can easily see here. You had all kinds of curious locomotive configurations. Here was the crossing, C&NW crossing at Gifford. Gifford used to be a very lively railroad operation. Next. Wonderful scene, it seems to me. Highball, number 19 at Faulkner. And right behind the hind locomotive is a carload of automobiles at Chapin, up the grade out of Hampton to Chapin. Motors grinding. This is not staged. This woman had no clue how close she came to getting her name in the paper. It was a reminder to me also from this point forward, don't take photographs in that location. You could get your name in the paper. Barney Bird getting off the locomotive on 50 coming in from Albert Lee into the Fort Dodge yard. Don't know the name of this brakeman. alighting at Britt in the spring of 1951. After the acquisition of M&StL by C&N.W. on November 1 of 1960, operations didn't change very much on this particular part of the former M&StL. 50 and 51 were big trains, good schedules. They tinkered around dramatically on operations to Des Moines and up to Spencer and Esterville, but not so much of a change on this part of the former M&StL. Here is an atypical operation. Trains north of Spencer typically did not have this kind of a consist. I think the train crew was probably a little lazy and carried the tonnage north and then took it back the next day. In any event, it made for a nice scene, and atypical too is the ballast. Ballast was rare. I mean, rock ballast, I should say, was rare north of Spencer. This I can attest to because in the summer of 1954, I was a section laborer on that piece of track, and I don't remember ever seeing any stone ballast anywhere. Oh, dirt, yeah, we had some of that. Here's number 50 on one of M&StL's two SD7s. I'd like to think that Paul K. Brubaker was the engineer on this day. It was Saturday. He liked to get to Fort Dodge so he could get home to Des Moines. I said earlier, operation south of Fort Dodge to Des Moines was really on a curious basis. Here we have a train that I think was probably all the way, maybe all the way into Des Moines, but it could have turned at Waukee too. I don't remember how that operation worked. It was ad hoc for sure. I can't think of the brakeman's name. He's coming out of the fireman's side. Alley-oop was his nickname. That's Waukee. If you go to Waukee today, it will not look anything like that. Not a thing. Also, that Waukee depot was absolutely filled with material that historians like me treasured. Now, the items that were treasured were up over the depot office and had been thrown there years before, or in the freight house in the walls between the studs. All kinds of interesting items, some of which were probably legal. Here's a view that is a treasure to me only because it's Al Pickett, who is in the doorway of this caboose. Al Pickett was a fine conductor, fine man, fine conductor. He suffered a heart attack, not on this trip, at Minburn. And Walt O'Connor was the locomotive engineer, and with dispatcher's permission, he got permission to go from Minburn to Perry as fast as possible with Al. Al didn't make it. Here's a scene that some of you might identify with, the engine facility at Marshalltown during C&N.W. years, but you can still see the M&StL imprint is stark. This is not a typical operation either. 50 typically have one, maybe two locomotives, not usually an Alco trailing. I think the Alco was being deadheaded to Fort Dodge. On the gangway here is Ray Dorn. Ray was the son of an M&StL railroader from Fort Dodge. His father was in the B&B gang, former of the B&B gang. Ray hired out as a brakeman and became conductor. His brother, Pete Dorn, was also a brakeman out of Fort Dodge. And what Ray is signaling here to the photographer, who in this instance is me, is that we ought to have lunch. So when he got his work done at Forest City, we had lunch together then. And this is the way things turned out too in the late 1960s. You had a former M&StL Russell up there in front, and then a CGWF unit behind, and I don't remember what the middle unit was there. In any event, snow, and it was cold. Help me out on the conductor, somebody. 1977, who would the conductor have been out of Fort Dodge? I'll think of it at 4 a.m. tomorrow. Forest City was one of those places that had good business on the M&StL, and you can see the reflection of that was a very modern depot and signal. But business was pretty slack by 1977 here, and the train did not go further than Forest City on this day, and then back to Fort Dodge. Here is a somewhat bitter view. I'm reading that right. The first car out is an MRX car, a empty car, Budweiser. For years and years, a good customer at Spencer was the Budweiser distributor, but service got to be so bad that ended. So this was probably one of the last instances where you see an MRX car headed back empty to St. Louis. The geographic or the location here, for those of you who have some knowledge of that piece of railroad, this is near what was called Molly's Hole. And don't get into pornography here, but in any event, this was a sag between Ruthven and Ayrshire. Some of you will remember Don Messerly, a brakeman for M&StL and then CNNW out of Fort Dodge. A fine guy, wonderful man, and excellent railroader. Getting off to do the work at, there's another dramatic shift here that I think is useful. Look at the boxcar still loading grain in 1977. But that era was coming quickly to an end. And so were the lifespans of elevators that you would see on the left here for that marvelous. Oh, would I like to hear the sound of that grains coming down the chute into the boxcars one more time. I guess that won't happen. Another instance where tonnage was taken north of Spencer and then dragged back. For what reason, I don't know. And this was a rather unusual locomotive configuration too. F units on the B line, curious. Ray Green and Walter O'Connor were the typical locomotive engineers up there at that time. And as I said earlier, I was always welcome, actually for over 4 generations of railroaders in my lifespan, always welcome to me to the offices or cabooses or locomotive cabs. Here we are, headed up to Terrell, May of 1972, in an F unit. Well, things only went from bad to worse as the state of the depot and the weeds on the main track attest to. All good things come to an end, I'm told. Here's the last trip out on the CNNW out of Spencer. To the left is Meredith Johnson. Some of you may know him. On to the right is my dad, and the far right, and the train crew. And I now can't think of the engineer's name. Pete Dorn was the conductor. Billy Fallon might have been the brakeman. All good things come to an end. Look at the weeds. And then there's an upside. Here is a 1-year-old Knut. No, he wasn't a year old yet. In the arms of Walt O'Connor, 4th generation, and the 2nd generation. Thank you. I would be happy to have questions. The rate is the same. Yeah.
Point out Larry Henschel brought some M&StL artifacts, padlocks, and keys and stuff he's got over displayed on that cabinet on the TV screen.
Thanks, Doug.
That you can look at as well. So,
How about some recollections from those in the audience?
Guys, M&StL side.
And
and
Yeah, when I was in grade school in Osage, we lived on Vine Street on the south part of Osage, and about a half a block from the IC track. And I remember in those times it would have been 1952 to 55, and the IC was still running steam through there. And then while we were living there, the change was made to M&StL and Illinois Central with the diesels, and the most beautiful ones were the F units and the yellow and the green on the M&StL. And coming from the north, they usually blasted right through Osage. I don't remember them stopping to do any work in Osage. And I don't ever remember any M&StL steam. So evidently that was done before 1952.
oh yeah, it was.
Your comment?
You got a question from Jeff Hoover about what was the most profitable line of track that they had?
M&StL?
Yeah.
Well, the short answer is I don't know. The longer answer is probably tonnage that they picked up in the Twin Cities and wheeled to Peoria. 488 miles. And with 19 and 20, time freights 19 and 20, you tried to do that within 24 hours so you didn't have the per diem. But that's a guess on my part. There must have been segments of line, like wheat moving from here to there. But as to the profitability, I can't say.
Your comment earlier about the guy that stole dressed for the steam days, I hired out engine service here in Boone in '74 and fired for a lot of the steam guys. A lot of them still wore the bib overalls and the work shirts, Hamilton pocket watch, Cromer hat. But I mean, in the 1970s, they were still wearing that stuff.
Yeah.
That was their uniform.
But Jimmy Murphy, I mentioned earlier, and we saw his image, he was atypical among railroad engineers, at least for me, because while you saw him in his uniform of the day, once he got off the locomotive and changed at the engine facility at Spencer, he had a 3-piece suit on. In his grip, he had shine shoes, so he changed his shoes, put on his bowler hat, and walked down to a rooming house. He wasn't going to stay in that engine facility at Spencer. Hell with that.
They ran passenger trains to Chicago on the IC.
On the IC?
Out of Waterloo.
No. M&StL and IC from about 1902 to about during the USRA years did have a joint passenger operation from Minneapolis to Chicago via Albert Lee and Waterloo. But that didn't last long. Other comments, observations?
Young, remember a name, by the name Eldon Darling. He was the depot agent of Britain when he closed the agency there, but he started out on a state hall.
And then a section falling out of there with auto split over. And he ended up at the end, one guy covered about 40 miles of track by himself. Of course, it was right before it got abandoned, but I talked to Dennis Holmes, and he had fond memories of those fellas. And they both, you seem to know a lot of St. L guys, but for a couple of years, remember.
I met Darling. M&StL was a family operation. For us, I mentioned Ray Dorn and his dad and his brother. The Blankenhagens in Fort Dodge, there must have been 4 or 5 Blankenhagens, sons, fathers and sons. The Dahlman brothers, the section boss at Gowrie, the section boss at Terrell, and there was another Dahlman, all 3 Dahlmans, all 3 excellent trackmen. But there was a family operation, and I've often wondered if it wasn't the vicissitudes of the Depression, the Great Depression, which for M&StL didn't start in 1930s. It started in 1923. 1923, M&StL was in bankruptcy for almost 20 years. And they had soldiered through all those ugly years, staying with the company, and the company's then staying with them. They had a loyalty that really was quite remarkable.
I can tell favorite railroad stories about working with those guys. Okay, they'd pull up to Laverne. They had a wooden caboose that time, and they'd pull a conductor up and back up and go uptown and eat and have something to drink. And so they spent quite a little time doing that. And fire whistle went off, and they didn't think anything about it. And half the crew in the diner took off. And so they finished eating and drinking and went out and got up, walked up the street to get up to the train and pull the caboose up to the conductor to get on. There was nothing much the caboose except a hot smoking frame.
No stove.
On that question of the whole profitable, that would have been Mason City. With the Gunther meat plant and the cement plants, they were the second most profitable community on the railroad behind Minneapolis.
Yeah, I could believe that. Yeah.
Don, I'd like to thank you for showing this, and this is amazing to have this packed. My dad retired 1965 from the M&StL in Marshalltown, Iowa. He was a machinist helper, and I'm so happy to see everybody here. His foreman's name was Harry Scott, and I was able Valentine's Day to donate to the museum here 2 photographs that they didn't even have of the M&StL depot. And I am so proud of the Union Pacific that we have a merger. There are some that do not like it, but I do, because I watch all the double stacked cars. And in my lifetime, I've been able to see trains going west and east, side by side through the yard in Marshalltown, Iowa. And it's amazing all of the things that are being followed. The economy is good. Union Pacific is amazing. The 1908 building is still standing there, the one that my dad retired out of. And I am so very proud of that. And I'm retired, so I have plenty of time to sit and count the coal cars going east. We in Marshalltown do not burn the coal anymore. Lion Energy and a steam plant, and they're going to put another one there. But I counted 178 coal cars going east, people. And so I have time to watch. And my dad would be so happy to know that there are so many people that remember them and M&StL like I do and all of the things. And so thank you, everybody that's come today. This has been amazing.
Let me follow up on that Laverne story. The tradition at Rolfe, Iowa, was for 56, the southbound train, pull down, drop off the hind brakeman and the conductor and shove back. Max Siedelmeyer was the conductor this particular day. He dropped off, went over to the CNW depot, and then went to get a beer. Meanwhile, the crew had done its business. This was hand signals, remember, back in those days. And so they put the train together, toot, toot, started out of town, Max didn't hear the toot toot. And pretty soon Max was running down the track to catch the caboose. A good scene at Rolfe. There must be other memories. There's one. Yeah.
The passenger service from Des Moines up to Minneapolis,
Yeah.
how long would it take? Do you have any idea what the run to, how many hours?
Well, when there was a night operation, you left Des Moines at 8 o'clock and you pulled down and waited for the westbound Rocky Mountain Rocket. And you followed the Rocky Mountain Rocket over at West Des Moines. And so you were in Minneapolis, and answer to your question, 8 o'clock a.m., 12 hours. And I don't remember the number of stops between Des Moines and Minneapolis. Yeah, quite a few is the answer. But to do all those local stops, that'd be passengers, mail, and express, all those places. Not bad. Meanwhile, the Rock Island, of course, had a much faster overnight and day train. And you'd use Great Western too.
The Western Grand Junction.
M&StL.
Okay, so that from Des Moines,
Yeah,
where did it go from there? We're done.
Up to Terra.
Tara.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, Harry, before I grew up, and just before the merger in '60, I could remember the M&StL units coming through town, daily train. Barely remember the motor car passenger. I wasn't old enough to walk uptown anywhere, but I'd look up Highway 140 Wallace Avenue, the main line. I could see it. It's up on a grade downtown. I could just see it. Back on my eyes are good. I can see that car. You can see that motor car and a crashing car behind it.
Yeah.
And then as I got older, I could take my bike and go up through town. Through usually coming from the north, headed to Des Moines, and stop a lot of times at Perry units there by Warford. And they can walk a couple of blocks to downtown, and there's some good places to eat. And Perry Bowl had world-class cheeseburgers and fries. And they do like that. The hotel had very good dinner meals, a couple of the restaurants.
So,
And I do remember in the 60s, I don't know if it was an M&StL operation, but it seemed like it was right, 60, 61 or so. The weed sprayer come there. They did burn, but they sprayed defect. Very old diesel on the wheat, and it was covered.
Yeah.
If there was a fire, it would go from wherever to Des Moines. You could smell it for a week or two when you go up town. But it was a busy line.
Yeah.
And then fall when they're shipping grain and stuff, they had 50, 60 cars lined up.
Yeah.
They had to stop north of the Milwaukee crossing on the north side. Then on the south side, they had plenty of room to park out there too. But Perry sat in a bowl on the M&StL. So they had to pull getting out either direction. But if they didn't have to, they could scoot through town about 30 miles an hour.
Yeah. Well, I'm a little puzzled about the weed sprayers. They've got an early view and a late view. In the middle, the weeds were burned. I know that as a fact because they did that the summer I worked on the section. I thought, boy, this is going to be a great day. We're not going to have to put on ties today. It would have been much better putting in ties. Much better. And the two young guys, of which I was one, were just put at the back to make sure that there were no burning ties. There were a lot of burning ties.
Where'd the track from Angus go?
Where the track in Angus go?
Well, you had two options at one point. You could go up to Terra, or you could go to Fort Dodge. There were two lines between Terra and Fort Dodge.
They met at Angus.
It met at Angus. And you could never believe it today, of course, but Angus at one time was a thriving coal mining center.
Because of stuff.
Just nothing there. And a thriving coal mining center in the coal field, in the cornfields. You would know it today. But Berkeley and Pilot Mound, all that whole area, there were coal coal mining operations.
That's the track that went all along.
I'm sorry,
That track went up through Ogden.
it did. Yep.
In the sixties, the city trains are running on the Milwaukee, Omaha, Chicago train, main line. I know 2 times that they detoured on M&StL from Grand Junction down the ferry. I didn't see it. I was young, but I heard it from the railroad
Oh, wow.
and the people there. I suppose it's 15 mile an hour, but I don't know. I did
No.
see Northwestern when probably 62 or 3 when Northwestern took over M&StL units, and they had an apple on one train came south from Grand Junction through Rippey. And I happened to be in the town, getting a haircut at the bar there. And it was probably 30, 35 mile an hour train going through there, about 56, 55 cars.
Yeah.
So I suppose the passenger train with their weight might not have been doing that kind of speed. It was weed covered.
Well, yeah, until passenger operations were discontinued in 1959, track was well maintained, and maximum authorized speed was 49 for passenger, I would guess, and probably exceeded an occasion. Never exceeded.
But it worked out because I think at Junction they had to back up the line from the Northwestern main line. But when they got to ferry, there was a curve interchange that went right towards the depot, eastbound. So
That would have been a day to have a ticket. Had a ticket
at night. So
Yeah.
Long since put to bed as a kid. And then
Yeah.
seeing anything about it. But it's still-
Yeah, can you imagine going to the ticket office in Perry to the Milwaukee ticket office, saying I want a ticket to Grand Junction?
Yeah. It was a detour.
Yeah.
American Freedom Train did run from Perry down to
Yep.
West Des Moines.
Yep.
76.
It did that. Sat out there a week or so.
Okay. I just want to remind folks also that Larry Henschel's got his items over there for the M&StL stuff. And our 244 painted in M&StL colors is just outside the door to the left on our track. They're doing some things, so be sure to check that out. Thanks, everybody, for coming.